Welcome back. In the last video I showed you how to do some baking in Blender, and I think you'll probably agree it's a little bit tricky to do the baking in Blender. So in this video I'm going to show you an add-on that you can install in Blender that will make baking a lot easier. So I just have the Edge Detect 2_end blend file open. So this is exactly where we left off at the end of the last video. And what I want to do is just go to Google or any search engine of your choice and type in TexTools Blender. And the first result should be this GitHub from Sav Martin. And if you just click on this, you'll find this add-on TexTools for Blender. So if you're familiar with GitHub, you probably know the score here. We click on code and we download the zip. And just make sure you know where that's downloading, because we'll be finding that in Blender in just a moment. And while that's downloading, if you want, you can have a look at the website, which you'll find on the right hand side here. And also further down, you can see that we have some documentation. We have a discussion on Blender artists, as well as discussion threads on poly count and instructions for installation. But I'm going to install that just now. So let's go back to Blender. We'll go to Edit, Preferences, and we'll find the Add-ons tab on the left hand side here, and we're just going to click on Install, and then you just want to find where you saved that. I just have it on the desktop here, and we just grab the zip file itself, click on that, and click Install Add-on. Once that's installed, it should pop up. We should be able to search for it by just typing in TexTools. We'll click on this to enable it, and we'll click on this little arrow to open this up. So we have a few options here. We have an option to actually remove the add-on. So if you ever want to remove that or update it, you just remove that first. We can change the baking device. I'm going to change this over to GPU. Swizzle coordinates here are a little bit strange. They're a little bit tricky to understand, but it's essentially the direction our normal maps go. So for programs like Blender, Maya, Modo, Marmoset Toolbag, and Unity, they use OpenGL normals. However, if you change over to DirectX, you can see that's used in 3ds Max, CryEngine, Source, and Unreal Engine. So if you ever want to use this tool to bake out your normal maps for a game engine, just make sure you're using the right ones. I'm going to change this back over to OpenGL for the moment. We also have image depth. At the moment, I'm just going to stick to 8-bit, but if you ever want to bake out anything that has a lot of depth to it, such as displacement maps for terrain, you probably want to change over from 8-bit to 32-bit. I'm going to keep that on 8-bit for the moment, and I'm just going to keep all the other settings here set to their defaults. We'll close down preferences. Let's just go into our image editor. I'm going to open up the side panel here and just click on TexTools. And you can see we have a few options here. So I'll just go through the most basic options. We have the size of the texture that we're baking out. I'm just going to change this over to 2K for the moment. We have padding as well. Now, what padding does is it gives a little bit of additional edge to our models so that we don't cut off our textures. So you can see on this particular texture, we actually have the UV line for the corner going right down the middle of this, but we actually have a little bit of extra information outside that edge that's not actually on our model. The padding is the setting that does that. By default in Blender, we have it set to a margin of 16 pixels. So if we counted the pixels from this edge to here, we would find that there's actually 16 pixels there. In this case, the padding would only be 4 pixels. So I quite like to turn that up a little bit, unless I have a lot of UV islands very close together. The next setting I want to show you is UV layout. Now in this case, we're using a cube that's already been UV mapped. However, if you have to do any unwrapping manually, TexTools actually has all these built-in buttons that allow you to unwrap your models a little bit faster than with Blender's default tools. Some of these can be really useful, such as aligning and flipping your models. Also, the packing is quite good as well. I'm going to go down to baking, and this is the main section that we're going to be looking at. So I'm going to click on one of my cubes, and we'll just change over to cycles to make sure that shows up. And we'll make a little bit more space so we can see our model. So this large button that says tangent normal, and it might say something else for you, this is where we pick the type of texture that we want to bake out. So if I click on this, we get a drop down with several different options. You may see a little arrow at the top or the bottom that allows you to find the other ones. Now my screen's set up to 120%, so not everything is fitting on there, but if you think you've got some missing, just hover over that arrow and you'll find it again. Now we have many different maps that we can bake out using TexTools. Now for our purposes, because we want to bake out this same texture here from Edge Detect, we're just going to preview this so that it shows up in the viewport. Then when we click here, what we want to do is we actually want to bake out emission. Now this might seem a little bit strange, but the way that Blender works is when we use this preview where we plug this straight into surface, a few versions of Blender ago, this would actually create a viewer node, and a viewer node was essentially just an emission shader where the color went into the color slot and it sent out an emission shader to surface. Now that shader is essentially used in the background. So see if we want to bake out this texture, what we actually want to do is we want to choose emission, and that's what we're going to bake out. I have a few options here before I click bake. I'm going to change the anti-aliasing to 4. I'm going to keep color space where it is, and I don't need anything else there at all. I'm just going to click on bake. Okay, so that took 26 seconds and you can see that our bake has come out. Now, if you look at it, the texture on this bake isn't actually that great compared to Blender's default one. But again, if we take this image, we're just going to save this. Remember, we do have to make sure we save these images once we bake them out. I'll put that on the desktop. I'll keep the name of this, Cube Emission, and this has come out as a Targa file, a TGA file. If you want to change that to something else, you can go to File Format and change it to whatever you want. I'll keep it as a Targa for the moment. We'll save that. We'll come back into our shader editor. We'll bring up our image texture, and I'm just going to open that Targa file from the desktop. And we'll look at that result, and you can see on our model that's shown up. And again, if we want to smooth this out a little bit, we can change from linear to something like smart, and that will just smooth things out slightly. We'll change color space to non-color as well. And we can take this and we'll just plug this into our color ramp and look at our final result. And you can see there we have a very similar result to this one. You can see that in actual fact, the one coming out of TexTools actually looks a little bit better. Now within TexTools, we have access to many other different types of outputs, and some of these can be very useful. We have a few that I just want to point out just for the fact that they can be incredibly useful. We have things like element ID and material ID that you can use to mask off your models, and this is very useful if you want to mix different textures together, or if you want to do some post-production on just very singular parts of your model. Moving up a little bit here, we also have ambient occlusion, bevel maps, cavity maps, and curvature maps, things that can be a little bit tricky to bake out in Blender on its own, and they can also be very useful. We also have some very interesting types of map, such as the dust map. And what dust map does is it adds this kind of white texture or higher values to the top sides of your model, and it will take into account all the modeling detail on your model, and that can create a nice little mask to add dirt particles or even just change different properties in your shader itself. Okay, so it's challenge time. Your challenge in this video is to bake out a few of the various maps available in TexTools. Now, I would recommend trying the geometry-based maps like the ambient occlusion, the cavity, and the dust maps, instead of going with the image-based ones, just because it's a little bit trickier to do those. However, if you do want to try those out, please refer to the TexTools website and the documentation for further tips and tricks on how to do that. So pause the video, have a go at that, and join me in a moment for the wrap up. Okay, welcome back. So I hope you got on fine with that challenge. So I've just opened up a brand new Blender file here and added a monkey head with a few segments, and I'm just going to shade that smooth. So next, let's just go over to our shading workspace. I'll add in a new image editor, And we'll just bring up our TexTools and we'll change this over to, I'll just do 1K so our renders go really fast. And let's just bake out a few of these textures here. So we'll go over to cycles, although I don't think that's actually super necessary. And let's just bake out a couple of these. So let's go with ambient occlusion first of all. And let's just keep this on 8 samples, and I'll turn off anti-aliasing as well, just so this renders out pretty quickly. We'll hit bake. And there we go. And you'll notice that one of the things that's really good about TexTools is we didn't have to add in an image in advance or save anything. We just get that ambient occlusion map directly in the image editor, and then we can just go and save that. We can also just click on this and render something else out. Let's try, in this case, shadow. Let's bake that one as well. Okay, and then we have our shadow map. Now, you can see that on this particular one, this comes in as a transparent map, and only our shadows are going to show up within this map. Now, if you ever want to go back to any of the other maps that you've baked, you can just click here, and it'll give you the option to go back in and re-render those using the exact same settings. And we can always use this drop down to go back and view any of our other maps. Again, let's just do one more map. Let's try the cavity map this time. And let's just bake this out. And again, very quick on that baking, just taking 1 second in fact. And this is quite a good quality cavity map. You can use this for adding dirt into crevices or dust or anything like that, or just general discoloration. So I hope you all agree that TexTools is a very, very useful tool. There is a couple of things I'd like to point out with TexTools. It hasn't been updated in quite a while, so although for the most part it still works really well with Blender 3.5 level, you may find the odd bug here and there. So if that does happen, you'll just have to bake your models out the old-fashioned way. Again, TexTools is not super necessary to have on your system, but when you really need to use one of those very specific maps like the dust map or something like that, it can come in really handy. And if you don't use it, well, it doesn't take up many system resources at all, and the UI doesn't get in the way of Blender's native UI either. Now in the next video, we are going to work on a node that's going to allow us to tile an image-based texture in a way that takes away any of the repetition, and this is really, really good if you find that you have a large area, and even using a tileable texture gives you a lot of repetition that's really obvious. This is going to help break that up. So join me in the next video. I'll see you then.